Art has an interesting way of putting things into context. I might have been pretty young at the time, but what I remember most from 2001 is not the fact that there was the first major attack on US soil in 60 years, but the fact that I saw The Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring for the first time. Middle-earth managed to captivate me in a way that I had no idea was even possible. It was a vast, colorful, and beautifully realized world. The heroes were heroes, the villains were villains, and while my appreciation for Tolkien's work would change over the years, just the scale and epicness of the adventure was enough to sweep me up, if only for a few hours, and forget the problems of the world that a 9-year-old couldn't hope to understand. In the same way, I'll likely remember how I felt during the COVID pandemic, but it will also always be colored by the fact that I played a video game that changed my life. One that gave me actual diagnosable trauma. One that flipped my entire worldview on its head. One that caused me to feel emotions that I had no idea existed. One that proves to me that video games can be much more than they are. A game that made me weep. No video game before had ever extracted a single tear from me. I still think about it once in a while and sob silently. It made that much of an impact. But most of all, it made me feel the way I did watching The Fellowship of the Ring for the first time. It made me feel that things might end up okay in the end. This is my journey playing NieR Automata. It doesn't start well, and I had to get over the fact that this is the second time I'm attempting to finish it. But it all ends up being worth it. So, I re-downloaded Automata and started it up again, hoping to get a different experience this time around. While the opening line does have a certain amount of dramatic and philosophical irony and the music is great, my worst fears seemed like they were coming back, that this critically very good game with a fervent fan base just was not for me. Before I even have a chance to grasp what is going on, I'm bombarded with more things that I hate seeing in what I can only call boilerplate anime sensibilities. Gunships, check. High-pitched female voices that border on prepubescent, check.
This is Command. Yorha Squadron, come in.
Over-sexualized robots, check. Shmup gameplay approaching bullet hell, check. Okay, there have been some bullet hell games that I've enjoyed, but you get my point. Once the shmup section ended, I felt like it got even worse. While there are definitely less modest designs than 2B, it's hard for me not to look at her character model and feel a certain amount of unease. The black lacy dress with the low-cut neckline, the cut of the leg which hides almost nothing, and the scarf over the eyes feels like the animator not so subtly nodding to the player, "We know what you want from this character." On top of that, the character self does almost nothing to dispel this idea either. She treats the entire mission with a certain amount of cold indifference. It's bad enough that 2B has to look like a sex doll, but she nearly acts like one too.
Copy that.
So, was that big old buzzsaw the Goliath you came here to take out?
No, just another defensive system.
Adding to my concern is 9S. While he isn't the worst personification of a schoolboy in anime form that I've seen, he definitely hits all the same points with almost none of the redeeming qualities. His boyish-like attitude and even design suggests that the developer wants you to know that this is a sidekick and he is inherently even less interesting than 2B, who herself is only interesting because of her character design and not because of her character.
Well, looks like it's time.
But at least we finally get to the part that I was looking forward to, the Platinum Games action. The first thing that immediately sticks out and something that I could never fully justify was the dodge mechanics. There's no punishment for just spamming the dodge, so in order to get yourself out of almost any situation, spam dodge. The combos themselves are useful and didn't feel broken, but as I acquired more weapons, I came to the realization that there's a shocking absence of variety in the combos. Changing types of weapons leads to different combos, but the combos themselves are the same between weapons of the same set. Overall, I do think that the core Platinum gameplay is certainly solid but unspectacular. They have done much better work in the past. One of the few positives from the intro is the music. Little did I know at the time, but the music itself was about to take me on a journey. In the future, I'm sure that there are soundtracks that I will listen to more than Keiichi Okobe's alien tempos, bizarre beats, and completely fabricated languages, but it was undeniable to me by the end that it is one of the greatest soundtracks to a video game, maybe the greatest. Sure, early on in the game, I didn't care for the characters, the plot seemed so-so, and the designs were off-putting, but I could listen to those tracks all day, every day. Once the high of hearing another music track faded, I was presented with another reality about Automata that worried me, considering this is exactly the same moment I bounced last time. It is yet another open-world game with nothing to do, and the world itself was flat, textureless, and cookie-cutter. Here's a forest section, here's the desert, here's Disney World for some reason, here's the same building models next to the ocean, in the desert, add in a boring factory too. It is world design at the absolute laziest. Combine that with the fact that all quests and side quests are marked even before you find them, so there's nothing you can run into unexpectedly. I didn't mention before, but the fact that this runs at a fairly solid 60 FPS on consoles is a godsend. There's not a lot to do between points A and B, and the fast travel system doesn't work for half the game, so getting around the world is paramount to the experience. Fortunately, running around as 2B never seemed to get boring. The character animation is fluid and fun, you have access to a lot of movement tech, and she moves like she is light on her feet, despite being a heavy girl. There is even sometimes some contextual dialogue with your character and the operators and your buddy 9S, even though he wears out his welcome before too long.
This must have been quite a city once upon a time. Too bad vegetation's claimed most of it now.
Operator 60 to 2B.
Now I have 2 stock anime characters to listen to instead of 1. This leads to another problem, the quests, specifically the early ones. Turning in an early quest led to another head-scratching moment. How come all of the lines are not voice acted? Why not let them all be text? Why transition between both if you can help it? It's distracting and weird.
The bunker told me to expect you. My name is Anemone.
The early quest design itself is uninspired, to say the least. Go here, grab things, come back. Go here, grab thing, come back. Go here, clear enemies. Okay, the enemy is running. Another scripted chasing sequence. Hey, wait, what are those robots doing? What is happening here? Is this what I think it is? It sure seems to be what I think it is. Wait a minute, did this game just get interesting for a second? Oh god, there's a stock anime villain too. He's gonna do a long rant about philosophy that's unskippable, isn't he?
I, or we, machine life forms, I suppose, have a keen interest in humanity, love, family, religion, war.
Okay, so this is sounding more negative than I wanted it to be. This game has some lows, but it never gets unbearable, so let's talk about where this game went from annoying to interesting. The previous quest leads directly into the next boss fight, Simone. Of course, you don't know that as 2B, but playing as 9S reveals the boss's name. Simone is a solid boss fight, but it uses clever elements of opera, theater, and body horror with the android corpses to great effect. After the fight, we meet a bunch of robot pacifists. Huh, that seems weird. Okay, so we've got Pascal, Mother Robot, Father Robot, Vendor Robot, John Paul, Big Sister Robot. Wait a minute, John Paul? The last boss fight was named Simone. This philosopher robot is named John Paul. That is too coincidental to be an accident. Is this an explicit reference to Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre? Wait, Pascal. Blaise Pascal? Wasn't the first robot in the intro named Engels? What's going on in this game right now? Did this game's writing just get good? I'm not a philosopher and I've never studied philosophy, but even I know these names. Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir were both philosophers who were in a stormy open marriage situation with each other. Blaise Pascal was a religious philosopher, and Friedrich Engels was a co-author on the Communist Manifesto. This game is clearly smarter than I've been giving it credit for so far. One of the early moments that had me wondering about this game was during one of the early quests. I died taking on some machines that were much higher level than me. Upon respawn, I had lost all of my plug-in chips and reread the tutorial on how to retrieve them. Upon going back to the point where I died, I realized something. It wasn't just an item model, it was an actual android. The Souls games don't even use skeletons to mark the player's death, just a blood patch. I've seen other players' bodies. Seeing my own body was shocking for a split second. That was me, or at least that was the character I was playing as. This android corpse contains the memories of the quests I didn't finish with it. Am I currently playing as 2B, or is that 2B? Does that mean that 2B is merely a construct with some memories on top of that? By playing the game, am I part of that construct, forcing her to do things over and over that she has no recollection of doing in a past life? Can her existence even be called a life? This is not to say that the early part of the game is forgivable. It dangles a lot of threads out in the open. Some you know are threads, and others become threads later in the game once you get a wider understanding of the story. But needless to say, once I stumbled upon this game dealing in some heavy philosophical ideas and directly calling to mind certain philosophers, I was determined to see this game to the end. This game is too smart to be this simple, and I suspected it wasn't showing all the cards in its hand yet. I have a desk at an office that I haven't been to in several months. The last time I was only in for a few weeks. Before that, I was at home for 4 months. I can't see my family unless in perfect conditions. I haven't seen many of my friends face to face in months, some closing in on a year. I also have a very justified, deep-seated distrust of my own government. Not that they are suddenly going to force me into a 9,000-year-long war, but that they really are only out for themselves and are clueless about how to deal with a pandemic.
Until then, this information must be kept confidential. Speak of it to no one.
Like my own life, the game slowly started taking things away from me. My android buddy ends up working somewhere else, so I don't have him for long sections of the game. The operator who checks in on 2B a lot in the early game gradually stops checking in altogether. Those android corpses you can revive and have fight for you, well, eventually even they can't be revived at some point because they will attack you. I can still read the messages they left behind and claim their stuff, but they aren't present in the game anymore, just a shadow of what was. Replaying the game as 9S, which you can do, doesn't solve this problem either. In fact, it makes it even worse. 9S has more to say about certain things than 2B does, but it doesn't change the outcome of any of the conflicts just because you play as a different character. Everyone who dies still dies. More context doesn't change that fact. It also adds to the tedium of the early game. Like my own life, my time spent with NieR seemed to be life on repeat. The same bosses, the same NPCs, the same story, the same everything. I decided not to include any late game spoilers in this discussion in the off chance that someone sees this who hasn't played the game. If you take nothing else from this review, this game is worth seeing through to the end. It is one of the all-time great video games as art games, and I mean that in the best way possible. It is something that can only be experienced as a video game, and for that reason alone, I'll overlook many faults. The story does eventually come together in magnificent ways. This makes sense. This makes sense.
Loyalty be understood by a machine.
These guys make sense. These characters are fleshed out in ways I didn't think was possible in the early game. The open world itself makes more and more sense. Even these weebs end up having their place. The game reveals itself, slowly at first, but then faster and faster until it crescendos into one of the most captivating stories ever conceived in a video game. NieR Automata deals in some very profound ideas that go well beyond, can machines be human? In fact, looking back, the game presupposes that androids have emotions.
It's kind of fun.
Emotions are prohibited.
The machines are revealed, fairly early on in the story, to have a lot more going on than just being mindless killing robots. In fact, I would argue that the game doesn't ask the question, can machines be human? I would argue that it asks almost the exact opposite question. Can anything not be human? As much as I hate Adam the character, this line sticks out.
The core of humanity is conflict.
The machines were created by aliens to fight humans. Androids were created by humans to do some things in the prequel game NieR, and later fight aliens. Even the machines which broke off from the main network fight for royalty. Androids fight for land, both fight because they hate each other. The multiple ironies of this line
Glory to mankind! Glory to mankind!
aren't lost on me either. I don't think it's any coincidence that when you go up to a deceased android, at least on PS4, you can pray and continue, or just continue. In fact, later in the game and after some key plot developments, there is no option to pray, just continue. As though that reason to exist no longer applies. This is what the core of the game is. It isn't the platinum action, the shmup sections, the sexy robots, or even the blunt references to philosophers long dead. The core of the game is conflict. And in conflict, something is always lost. Some androids fight for a reason. Maybe the fighting itself is the reason. Life is essentially a fight against nature. Nature always wins, death is inevitable, but we continue living regardless, and we find meaning in the struggle. Once I understood that, almost everything about this game clicked into place. Being thrust into the middle of a global pandemic was not something that I ever thought was even possible. Neither was being emotionally broken by a sexy anime android and her twink boy toy. But what struck me most about NieR Automata is not how much it ended up paralleling the experiences of the pandemic, that over time my friends, colleagues, and social structures would seem even more and more distant, some would be corrupted not by the virus but because of its effects, that the closest I could get to real interaction would be the specter of someone and not the person themselves, and as time went on, even that specter would often betray me. The niceties of the Platinum gameplay, the shmup, and 2D platforming sections change up the pace of what would otherwise be so-so gameplay, but they only serve to act over the top of what this game is, a deep intrinsic look at our failings and our attempts to escape our circumstances. We will all die one day, that was assumed from the day we were born, yet our parents brought us into the world anyway. Our life itself was a form of conflict. Conflict with nature, conflict with ourselves, with each other, and with the games we play. As a 9-year-old, I think I needed the Lord of the Rings in my life. It showed me that there is good and evil, but that evil itself could be overcome, even in the face of impossible odds and personal failure. I used that in my own life to overcome the confusing time of the post-9/11 era. And it has been a rock, something I can always return to be entertained, to be wowed, and to think about my life, where it's been, and where it's going. In the same way, I also think I needed NieR Automata at the age of 28, in the face of an inept government with an egotistical leader trying to navigate the waters of complex economic, national healthcare, and social realities, all while being cut off from my friends made it seem like the game itself was a commentary on my life. Being left alone for long stretches with little to occupy my brain made me think more deeply about issues that had never breached my consciousness before.
Everything that lives is designed to end.
Unlike the real world, I hope for some positivity from this game. Maybe not a traditional happy ending, but something that makes it seem worthwhile. That all the suffering was for something. Maybe there is a lesson here that has yet to be learned. Maybe, just maybe, there is even more to this game. Why are we here? What does it all mean? Can we ever break the cycles which bind us? We might never have the answers. The answers themselves might be confusing, just as depressing, or might even suggest harder questions than those which came before. We might never be able to escape the cycles of conflict that bind us. In the end, not having the answers to all the questions doesn't mean that existence is pointless. In fact, far from it. We are allowed to make our own fate, and it doesn't have to be based on what others tell us. If caring about someone is the only reason to exist, then that might be good enough. But if NieR Automata managed to teach me anything, it's that nihilism isn't the end, it's only the beginning. If I can learn to care about the fates of two androids about whom I was indifferent for half the game, and spent paragraphs complaining about earlier in this video, in spite of the game itself presenting all the reasons not to care, then maybe there is hope in the world. And if we can all learn to care together, well, in that case, the weight of the world isn't so heavy.
wanna shout it loud, even if our words seem meaningless. It's like I'm carrying the weight of the world. I wish that some way, somehow, that I could save every one of us. But the truth is that I'm only one girl. Maybe if I keep believing, my dreams will come to life. Come to life.
If you somehow managed to make it this far, thank you. This is not something that I usually ever do. I've never really had an interest in YouTube or content creation before, but there's just something about the way that this game made me feel that inspired me to want to share it with people. So if you were entertained or liked what I had to say, please consider subscribing. If there's enough interest, I would actually like to continue making videos because honestly, this whole process, even though it took me dozens of hours to make this, ended up being something that I actually really enjoyed. So I might continue doing more in the future. So if you subscribe, you're telling me that you like my content and you want me to make more. And if you feel so inclined, you can also feel free to comment, as I'm always open to having a discussion, or if you have some criticism for this video, please feel free, because I think I would like to make better videos in the future if I can. Until then, glory to mankind.